Well, recently, Matt Taibbi revealed in the latest installment of the Twitter Files the truth about Russian bots. Now, we've heard it all for years, that Russian bots are controlling the discourse online, and because of this, they're effectively brainwashing Americans into thinking the way the Kremlin wants. Here are some examples.
Russian hackers now trying to use the Florida shooting as an opportunity to divide Americans. As NBC first reported last week, fake Twitter accounts, Jack Dorsey, wake up and pay attention to this, have been posting hundreds and hundreds of inflammatory messages about gun control. Hey, Jack Dorsey, it is not just about user growth. You control the fact that these bots are able to use your platform. Are you comfortable with that? So, Ken, we know what Jack Dorsey's comfortable with. Anything.
There are some really hard problems, like, the Russians playing on Twitter.
Any sort of the bots, you can't verify who they are, and that actually changes the dynamic in the landscape. The Russiagate hoax thing gets elevated by bots, which makes more real people look at that trending hashtag.
We have U.S. military aid, military advisors, State Department, public diplomacy, USAID, everyone trying to help Ukraine. And at the same point, the president is saying, according to this article, that's really just part of Russia. They're all corrupt. You know who says that? Russian state-sponsored propaganda, bots and trolls that we tracked over the last 5 years.
Bots and trolls, bots and trolls. Where do they get this information? Who knows who is a bot and who isn't? Well, it turns out where these media and social media companies got their information from is an online list made by a think tank called Hamilton 68. And now we find out from Matt Taibbi that much of the chatter online that's attributed to Russian influence is actually just ordinary Americans expressing their opinions that happen to be counter to the U.S. desired narrative. Basically, we're finding out that you could have ended up on a Russian bot watch list for simply having the wrong opinion. Now let's look more at the history of Hamilton 68. So Hamilton 68 is a dashboard funded by the Alliance for Securing Democracy, a neoliberal DC-based think tank whose advisory council includes neoconservative writer Bill Kristol, former ambassador to Russia Michael McFaul, ex-Hillary for America chief John Podesta, and former heads or deputy heads of the CIA, NSA, and the Department of Homeland Security. Now, the dashboard was headed by former FBI counterintelligence official and current MSNBC contributor who you saw on screen, Clint Watts, and claimed to monitor the activity of over 600 accounts associated with Russian influence operations. Accounts tracked by the dashboard include those connected to news or political outlets, political personalities, and memes related to current events. Now, the dashboard claims that they are observing these accounts to monitor any signs of Russian interference in online conversation. However, according to the Twitter Files, upon closer inspection, Twitter execs discovered that of the 644 accounts listed on Hamilton 68, only 36 were registered in Russia, with the remaining being mostly real people, mostly from the US, Canada, and the UK. Those who were not listed were not only overwhelmingly English, those who were listed, were not only overwhelmingly English language, 86% of them, but also included a range of political dissidents, from leftists to anarchists to humorists. Even Twitter execs were shocked to see who was on the list and could not understand how people like a 73-year-old snowbird in Florida or the author of a book about the U.S. Constitution could find themselves on this list. Now, there were some real consequences of this list. It was used to fuel thousands of news headlines about supposedly Russian bot infiltration of online discussions. Now, whether it be the Brett Kavanaugh hearings, the Tulsi Gabbard campaign, or even the 2020 election, essentially, the narrative that these campaigns and ideas were really being supported by Russian troll farms was damaging to our ability to think, speak, and discuss freely. How many of us have been accused of gobbling up Russian propaganda over the years? Now, it wasn't just news and social media who bought into this dashboard being legitimate. According to Taibbi, institutions like Harvard, Princeton, Temple, NYU, and even elected officials such as Dianne Feinstein, James Lankford, Richard Blumenthal, Adam Schiff, and Mark Warner promoted Hamilton 68 as a source of news without fact-checking and without even consulting the people on the list. Again, what we're finding out is that the entire narrative of Russian bots online controlling our minds through misinformation is nearly entirely fabricated. 0.05% of the accounts in the Hamilton dashboard were actually Russian bots. The rest were real people with real opinions. Opinions which were labeled as misinformation and ended up being used by media, universities, and politicians to further their campaign to censor ideas they didn't like. The Alliance for Securing Democracy has responded to these Twitter files discoveries. They say, quote, the dashboard's original methodology acknowledged that the content within the network is complex and should be understood in a nuanced way. So they're trying to tell us it's complex and nuanced. It's not as straightforward as you think. It should be pretty straightforward. They said that they were tracking Russian bot accounts. That seems pretty straightforward. They instead are now saying, well, it's complex and nuanced, right? Because only 0.05% ended up being Russian bots. They said, quote, some accounts we tracked are automated bots, some are trolls, and some are real users. What do they consider a troll? People call each other trolls all the time. Is a troll just somebody who doesn't agree with you and then they comment on your post in disagreement? Is that a troll? They said some are in Russia, but many are not. So they admit that many of the accounts they followed were not in Russia. They admit that some are real users. They then call some trolls. They say some are bots. Yeah, you're right, 0.05%. Individual accounts were algorithmically selected based on analytic techniques developed by J.M. Berger that were used to identify the most influential accounts within those networks. The Hamilton 68 team did not individually review or verify all accounts because the focus of the dashboard was to analyze behavior in aggregate networks, not specific accounts. So they're admitting right there they weren't looking at the specific accounts and determining whether or not it was a Russian bot, although I thought that was the premise of this dashboard. And really, 644 accounts doesn't seem like that many. How hard would it have been to check on all of those accounts? You've been doing this for years. You could have gone and systematically gone through each account and figured out which one was a Russian bot and which one wasn't, but they didn't. They say, quote, the dashboard was an analysis of networks that, one, reliably amplified Russian propaganda and disinformation, either wittingly or unwittingly, and two, primarily targeted audiences in the United States. This would account for the inclusion of some genuine Americans in the account list, not because they were labeled by analysts as being a bot or even Russian, but because the analytic techniques used to identify them as being part of a network that either promoted or engaged with Russian propaganda targeting American audiences. So they're saying, if you said something that sounded Russian, we labeled you a Russian bot. That's what the algorithm apparently was designed to do. Identify accounts that just sounded a little too Russian, sharing too many of the opinions of the Kremlin, and then were labeled Russian bots. They go on to say in their rebuttal to the Twitter files, American audiences regarding the specific accounts, the Twitter thread alleges are on the list. The Hamilton 68 team took data privacy seriously and worked to maintain the anonymity of monitored accounts to avoid doxing or harassment. Sure, so did the FBI with their terrorist watch lists. So does it make you feel better if you find out you're on a terrorist watch list, but the FBI says, but don't worry, we kept your information private so you wouldn't be doxed? They say neither ASD nor the Hamilton 68 team will comment on the identities of individual accounts. Well, that's good. Please see the Wire accounts not publicly identified section of this webpage. However, some of the accounts, they're going on here. However, some of the accounts the thread alleges belong to ordinary Americans, Canadians, and British have contributed to RT or work for outlets that are regularly retweeted by overt Russian state media accounts. Given the methodology, it is unsurprising that the network analysis that was performed would identify these accounts as being relevant in the promotion of Russian propaganda. This, of course, does not mean that those individuals are witting agents of Russia. So they're saying, okay, if you work for RT, if you retweeted RT, if you engaged in any way, then you could have been potentially labeled a Russian bot. You didn't have to actually be one, which is the entire premise of this dashboard, right? It's meant to identify Russian bots, not individuals who happen to agree with the Kremlin. But they're saying, no, if you agreed with the Kremlin or if you retweeted or were amplified by, so if RT retweeted you, you could have ended up on a Russian bot watch list. How insane is that? So if you agree with Russians and if Russians agree with you, you are a bot. They say as ASD experts stated, quote, some accounts we track are automated bots, some are trolls, again, that word trolls, and some are real users. Some are in Russia, but many are not. So basically, you're not allowed to have an opinion that is the same as a Russian. And if you do, you are on a Russian bot watch list. And who knows what happens with these Russian bot watch lists, just like terrorist watch lists that the FBI accumulates over time. What do we find out? We find out that it makes it difficult for these people that are listed on these lists, whether they should be there or not. They have a difficult time getting through airports. Some countries they cannot even enter. It's not just, oh, you're on a watch list and the FBI is watching you. It's not that simple. It actually affects the rest of your life. Who knows how this Hamilton 68 dashboard was used in addition to just being used by Twitter executives who are looking at this list and saying, I guess we have to flag these accounts as Russian bots? It goes beyond that. And the thing is, we don't know. We don't know how far that goes. But what we've learned is this Russian disinformation campaign was disinformation in and of itself. Disinformation that mainstream media ran with and our politicians have tried to rule by. They were trying to make laws around misinformation. Laws that govern our lives. So the big question is, why did they do this? Now, surely Clint Watts and the ASD knew this dashboard was full of crap. They knew they didn't have any real Russian bots on their list. There's no way they didn't know. So what kept them going? Why did they do it? Well, probably for a lot of reasons. First of all, money. There's money involved in making and managing these lists, money that comes from donors, grants, and other funds. So maybe they kept going because, they didn't want to let on to the fact that either their methodology was useless or, more likely, there are no Russian bots online. Another reason why they may have done this is for control. Remember, Clint Watts is a former FBI counterintelligence official. The FBI has become another branch of the intelligence community. The CIA has long been trying to control narratives to further whatever their agenda. Trump, populism in general, and a growing anti-war sentiment in the U.S. is placing their entire reason of being in jeopardy. We're being groomed to want war with Russia. And the idea Russians have been able to sinisterly take over the minds of our loved ones is as good a reason as any. Or it could be that Trump derangement syndrome just got way out of hand. That Hillary used Russians as a way to deflect from her emails and server scandal, and her rabid supporters just ran with it and ran and ran and ran and ran. Whatever the reason, what Matt Taibbi uncovered regarding Hamilton 68 is unsurprisingly damning of our mainstream media, our politicians, and of ourselves, quite frankly. Many of our MSNBC gobbling friends and neighbors have sadly been proven to be able to be brainwashed by the agenda of the powerful. Unfortunately, over the past few years, in more ways than one. All right, well, despite the U.S. blowing through the $31.4 trillion debt ceiling in January, the White House still refuses to reduce spending money and sending money to Ukraine and refuses to acknowledge the rapid inflation that it has caused our economy. So now would be a great time to diversify into gold with Birch Gold. In times of high uncertainty and instability, gold is king. It is dependable. Birch Gold makes it easy to convert an IRA or 401k into an IRA in precious metals. Here's what you need to do. Visit birchgold.com/Kim. That's birchgold.com/Kim to claim your free info kit on gold and then talk to one of their precious metals specialists. Think about this. To dig our country out of this mountain of debt, every single taxpayer in America would have to write a check for $247,000. Small change, right? And it's only getting worse. So protect yourself with gold today by visiting birchgold.com/Kim with an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau, thousands of happy customers, and countless 5-star reviews. You can trust Birch Gold to protect your future. Visit birchgold.com/Kim today. All right, coming up, our next guest says signs indicate we are already in World War III. It's just a matter of containing it. We'll be talking to them next, only on Rumble. Well, all eyes have been on Ukraine, and because of it, we forget about what's happening